Perfect. I think we are ready to get started. So welcome to everyone to our continual education series on different products within Sage Intacct. I am Stuart Blumenthal. I'm the Intacct Practice Director here, and today we are going to be going over the Real Estate Tips and Tricks webinar hosted by Dom Pernai, who is very intimate about the real estate products out there. He's been in the wrote the product, but also has been in the real estate arena for the last 30 plus years. So really understands some of the things that people go through regarding that. Just a couple logistics before I turn it over to Dom First of all, this presentation is about 30 minutes long. All the phone lines are muted. So you're gonna have to use the questions feature, which is in the GoToWebinar. And if you want a copy of this presentation or video, just let me know. I will make sure that we get that over to you as once it gets posted. Also, any of our previous webinars that if you have missed, they're up on our website, but also on our YouTube channel. So if you ever have a question about where our YouTube channel is, send me an email and I will send you the link. We put a lot of videos up there to make sure that people are educated on what's going on regarding the product and with each of the releases. Couple other things, updates going on in the Sage world. First of all, Sage will be releasing their R3 release on August 18th. That's a Friday night. It'll be late, for some people in the East Coast, a little bit earlier on the West Coast, around 8 or 9 p.m. On the 18th. Just keep in mind that this release there's a lot of stuff on the construction side for it. This is where they're releasing the compliance module that is due, and they're adding a lot of other features to the construction area. So once we get a copy of the release, which should be in the next week or two, we get to play around with it a lot further. We've seen a lot of it, but we now get our hands on it. We'll be turning that over we'll be setting up a webinar sometime in early August, so that make sure that you guys all see what's in there, see what's happening, so you're ready way ahead of time. We'll also update our website with some of the release notes and things like that. So again, keep on the lookout for that. We should have the information in the next week or two, able to start sending over to you. Last but not least, before I turn it over to Dom, in terms of upcoming webinars, we do have a couple coming up. Next week, we have our Procore one. That one had to get rescheduled due to technical difficulties. We are really excited to have this one. This one is going to be done by one of the Procore implementers. And so really excited to have her share her knowledge on implementing the Procore and Intacct integration together, kind of tips and tricks that she has run into in terms of the implementation. And then a couple major ones in August. I mentioned again the R3 release. We don't have that listed yet because we don't have the exact dates, but we do have two other ones. One is on the 15th, a new product called Velexio that is an Excel add-in that pulls information directly from Sage Intacct into Excel. And we've been working with them in terms of creating some WIP schedules and financials that pull directly in to Excel without having to create any type of a middleware link. It's basically will take Excel and bring the two together, and you can update cells and say, I want this amount in this cell and things like that. It's an amazing product. So we'll be going over that on the 15th. And then on the 17th, Carol's going to be going over the accounts payable and general ledger approval tips and tricks. We did one just recently on purchasing that we got a great attendance. We'll be doing another one on the tips and tricks. On the 14th of September, we'll be doing Intacct bank feeds, talking about showing how that works, tips and tricks of getting that ready, which bank accounts you should be working with. And then last but not least, on the 21st of September, we will be doing one on the Intacct construction payroll module. We felt like it's time to get that one out there, and we got that scheduled. Also at the end of the year, we will be doing 2 year-end webinars, one specifically on closing out the month-end processes in all the modules, and then we'll be doing a second one specifically for the construction payroll module as well. So we're going to break that into 2 different sections. So with that, Dom, I'm going to make you the presenter here, and testing 1, 2, 3, making sure you can hear me okay.
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So
wow, there you go.
Awesome, Dom, you're now the presenter and you can take, so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dom. I'm going to be quiet for once in my life, and I'm going to allow, if there's any questions, please ask it through the features. I'll make sure to interrupt Dom if I cannot answer those through the chat. So with that, Dom, it's all yours.
Beautiful, Stuart. Thanks very much. Appreciate everybody's attendance today. And I'm sure, I would imagine you'll find this quite informational if you have not had any exposure to Sage Intacct Real Estate. We do have some overview videos. We've got a 12-minute overview video on our YouTube channel. So I would encourage you to check that out if you've never seen the product before. And what we'll do today is we're going to kind of run through a series of tips and tricks, exactly what we're supposed to do as part of this webinar, and make sure that if you have implemented Sage Intacct Real Estate or are thinking of implementing it, you've got some ways to go about it to make sure it's done in the best manner possible. So one of the first things I always like to start with, just to make sure that we level set, is as we go in, the Sage Intacct Real Estate product does start as its own tab. And once it opens up, everything is architected around a lease. So we do have a user-defined dimension for leases that get set up here within Sage Intacct. So every time we are sending transactions over, we are sending over the entity, the location, the tenant, which is also the customer, and the lease. So as we work inside Sage Intacct Real Estate, we follow those same setup parameters. So we set up properties, which are also locations in Sage Intacct. We then section those properties into units or rentable spaces. Then we have a separate database table of tenants, which is our customer records from accounts receivable. And from there, we tie it all together as part of a lease. So when we go in and establish a property, from a best practice perspective, it is always best if you build your property, or if you want to call it location, inside Sage Intacct first. Because if you don't do that, what's going to happen is when you go in to add a property here inside Sage Intacct Real Estate, and if I type webinar property and go in and pick what entity I wanted to talk to as an example, then I tell it all the information that we would need. When it creates that location here inside Sage Intacct, then you'll notice it does not allow me to define the property or location ID. So we definitely think best practice is to make sure that we establish those properties. This is really the location dimension inside Sage Intacct, but I've simply renamed it to properties. We want to make sure we do that in here, because then we can choose our own property ID. So when I come in here, and if I say, well, I want to create property 220 and give it a name and tell it what the parent entity is, then what you'll notice is once I hit save, oh, of course, and we'll go about that way and save it. Now it has saved that property ID for me that way. So I have property 221 in here. Now when I come in and I decide that I want to set up a new property, if you notice, as I begin to type it, it finds it for me here inside Sage Intacct Real Estate. I probably just have a few of them out here, so we'll go in and grab it that way. So the idea here is that you're able to go through and pull that information in, and then it sets it up with that entity and such for you. The reason why this is so important is because then when you go to do data entry inside Sage Intacct, if I go into order entry and go in to do a real estate invoice, as an example, when I'm down in my entry grid and I go to my property, I'm going to see it as that P221, right? And I don't have to see all of these PMP and all of those digits and characters handled that way. So we always tell clients, number one, whenever you go in to set up your properties, if you have new properties that you're adding to your portfolio, or you're a new customer, make sure you add those locations first inside Sage Intacct, because then all of that will carry over here into Sage Intacct Real Estate for us. So that's the first thing we always like to make sure that we identify. The next thing that we always like to make sure that we identify is around our charge controls. So when we identify our charge controls inside our property setup, what we're really doing is we're identifying all the different types of charges that we can have for this property on any given lease. So this doesn't mean that you're limited to only these items inside doing any sort of billing. But what it is saying is that if you want to set up a recurring charge, you need to have those items on this table. And the way these items are established is inside order entry. When we go in to set up our items, we have a few different rules that we need to follow. And the first rule is the type of item that it is. So the item always has to be non-inventory sales only. So that is one prerequisite. The unit of measure needs to be count, because we're really not charging eaches and things like that when it comes to rent and CAM and tax and all of those other items that we bill people that way. And then also, we have to have it as the product line real estate. Those three items, non-inventory, the item type, the unit of measure, and the product line ID, all need to be very specifically identified that way. That is then what tells the real estate system that it is an item for real estate. So because you may have noticed when I'm in my simple item list, I have a number of items and billings that we'll do, especially around maybe construction or development or whatever the case may be, that I don't want to show inside the real estate module. So if we make sure that we follow those rules, now when I'm in my property setup, all of those items show up for me. And we can go through and identify what items we want on this given property. Now, one thing to mention, as I was saying, when I put them in on the property, it means that they might be a recurring charge. And if they're not a recurring charge, I still may want to list them on here if they're going to be subject to late fees, or if they're part of our management fee calculation. So we'll talk about management fees in just a minute, but it's important that we list them if we want them to be part of our management fees, part of our late charges, or if they're a recurring charge. So you'll want to make sure that you follow those steps and those rules along that way as well. And once you've done that, then obviously I could come in here and say, well, I know I need to bill utilities. I want it part of my management fee calculation. I also want parking there as well, but I don't want security deposits. I want to charge late fees on each of those. I also want to include late charges. They'll be part of my management fee, but I do not bill late charges on a late fee. So that would be the way that we would establish that way. So it's important as you're identifying those items, you make sure that you remember those different steps along the way. And you'll also find that as you're working with these items, we'll identify them as part of a general ledger group. So I can go in and identify inside this general ledger group the name of it. So all we're really doing here is giving it the name. And we do have the ability to give it a deferred revenue account. So if somebody prepays it or something like that, we can identify that way. But otherwise, then I'll point inside my transaction definition what GL account I want this mapped to. Now, in this example, the implementer who did this is obviously quite intelligent because they identified the GL account right in here. So it just makes it easy to find when you're building that transaction definition and handling it that way. Now, also in here, just to show you that transaction definition is part of order entry. It's under the setup piece, and it's in here. So we will have one called real estate invoices, and it's inside my real estate invoices that I am going in and telling it how to post all of this information. So I'm telling it what GL group goes to what GL account. That's where I said it was so intelligent of the implementer in this case to go through and put the account numbers inside the GL group because it just makes it easier to map it that way. All right, back to real estate. So I've got all my charge controls mapped. As I said, mark them in here if they're part of our management fee. And what I meant by that is when you're inside the management fee, let's talk about the different formula calculations. So I can tell it, do I want this based upon all charges, all gross potential rent charges, all gross potential rent payments? Well, all gross potential rent charges and gross potential rent payments means that those items have to be flagged as part of GPR. If they're flagged as part of GPR, then it knows to include these item IDs in the management fee calculation. And then from here, it's just some of the other standard options as well, all charges, all payments, those types of things, and then you build your fee and all of that. I don't think we need to go into too much detail on that, but I do think it's important to identify that in here. All right, so that is part of it. And now once I've gone through and I've got all of that information mapped and coming over appropriately, now when I go in to set up my lease, all of that detail will be here for me. So if I go in and pick a given property and go to recurring charges, when I hit add new, the only ones that show are those that have been set up for that property. So this item ID is really kind of a bigger deal because if we've got properties that are residential in nature, we want to set up a residential item in case we have it going to a different GL code. We want to make sure that we go through and set that up to only have residential rent on that property. Then no one can accidentally choose the wrong item ID, which then corresponds to the proper general ledger account with it. So that makes sure that we map all of our data that way accordingly. And we follow all of that through there. Now, obviously, for those of you that are familiar with Sage Intacct Real Estate, it's in here as part of the lease. I'm just going to cancel out of this one that I've done and show you another one, where I can obviously go through and I can have multiple tenants and multiple units on the same lease. So in this example, I've got one tenant that has an office space and parking. So then inside the recurring charges, this is where I map what item is for which unit and to which tenant. So if we do have multiple tenants, you can go through and set up all of the individual tenants' charges that way. And all of that will come along that way. Also in here, this is where we identify all of our recovery settings, and we're able to go through and tell it what period we want to do the recovery billing for. So I've said to do it for the full year here. And then what GL accounts come over. How do we come up with our pro rata share? And in here is where we map our GL accounts. Now, one thing that's come into focus as we're talking to more people about recoveries, and that is what this means is that the system, when you go to pull all of the expenses, is going to be looking for the activity in this case, these three accounts to make up utilities. But remember, it's tied to this location. So that means when you're doing your accounts payable entry, what you need to do is make sure that you are coding all of those GL expenses, all of those bills to that location level. You do not want to have them simply go to the entity level because the property does everything at the location level. And that allows us to go through then and pull all of that information over as long as it's coded to the proper location level. So we definitely want to make sure that we identify all of our bills and accounts payable that way. And once we've done that, then when the system pulls over all of the expenses, it knows exactly what amounts and such we need to go through and bill accordingly that way. Okay. All right, as we kind of continue along here, the next thing to make sure that we're aware of is when we're inside our accounts receivable and looking at all of our given tenants, what you'll notice, and I'm just going to use the same one because this way it makes sure that we've got it this way. What you'll notice is that inside the tenant or customer information, this is a bi-directional interface. So any changes I make on the first screen here to contact information or name or whatever the case may be, that will flow through to Sage Intacct Real Estate and vice versa. So if I go in to Sage Intacct Real Estate, go to set up tenants, make a change, it will update here in accounts receivable. If I go into accounts receivable, make a change under the tenant or under the primary contact information, that will then show updated inside Sage Intacct Real Estate. And one other question we've heard from people is the ability to store multiple contacts for a tenant. That's exactly the way this is meant to work here inside accounts receivable. So you can set up as many different contact types as you need, maybe like a legal notice, and then you can simply go in and grab who the appropriate contact is for that legal notice for that tenant, because all of the information that was set up within this person shows here. So I've got all their contact info, all their email information, phone information, mailing information, all of that is established as part of the contact inside Intacct. And now if I tell the system to generate a document and send it to the person who is the legal notice based upon that category, it will know obviously exactly which contact to use for each of these. So that's one other important thing that you want to be aware of, you know, as you go along here.
Dom,
All right.
there was a question that came in from the group. It says, for the recovery options, I have 2 properties for one entity. How would I add multiple properties on an invoice? Can I go back and edit invoices to add the property without having to go through the approval process again?
So Stuart, what I would say is, I mean, you know, I believe it depends upon the configuration, but you should be able to go in and edit those invoices and put the proper location or property on those invoices so the system knows to pull that information across.
Okay, perfect. So for the person who just asked that, just if that makes sense, great. If not, let's set up a let's set up a call with our team on that one. So
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, great. And then so we've talked about all the tenant information here and all the contact information, how that is bidirectional and so on. There's also another step around contacts, and this is relating to your contacts within your organization. You know, you've got various property managers, leasing agents, maybe asset managers, whatever the case may be. And you may want to send information to those people as you work within the system. So what you'll notice in here is if we go into setup and properties, when I go into a given property and I go to the address tab, you can add contacts from Intacct in here. So I can actually pull those contacts over from Intacct and identify which address type they are. So maybe this is the property manager, and notice no address came over. That's because no address was set up with that contact. So I do need to come in now and add an address to it. So I will do that as I go. But I just want you to be aware that now what happens is you're able to go in and pull contacts from Intacct over here and identify them as one of your options under your address pull down. And you may wonder, why does this matter? Well, because now they're flagged as the manager of this property. So then you have the ability to do smart events to that manager. So we can set up a report that says notify all managers when, you know, there's when of a delinquency report or something like that. So if we want to send out delinquency reports once a week automatically, we can set that as a smart event so it would automatically send that information over. And this information also is bidirectional. So if we update address information and such, that will flow through to our contact info inside Intacct. Okay. All right. Now, one of the other things I definitely would like to cover, I wanted to show people what's coming. So as we talk about the August release, I want to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the data that we will be working with. For those of you that are currently on the product, you may be aware that at this point, we do not have options to go in and customize your reports. We are making a significant change to that in the August timeframe. So let's go in and give you an idea as to what this looks like. So what we are doing is when we are sending information over from Sire into Intacct, what is happening is under each of our locations, properties, and units, different information will flow through, and then lease information. So if I go to my location information and I go in and look at my property, Columbia Place, what you'll notice here is it's linked. So I've got all of that. But then when I go to my property information, I see what type of property is it? When was the last time we ran scheduled charges? What's the total square footage? What's the rentable square footage? What's our real estate tax information on this property? And certificate of insurance information as well that flows through over here. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because now what we're able to do is when we're in the reporting system, whether we're using custom reports or ICRW, we have access to all of that data because we've added all of those fields within Intacct to pull that over. So we have that for property information. Then from a unit perspective, we will be sending detailed unit information over, which we currently do not today. And with that, we'll be sending over what type of unit it is it occupied or not, and the square footages related to those units. So that information will come over as well. So now if we want to create a report by unit that shows what our square footage is, we can do that. However, as my colleague Perry Levine would say, but wait, there's more. Under the lease information, what we are doing is we are coming over and sending over detailed lease information as well. So we're sending over lease date information, security deposit information, the unit information, all of the recurring charges with bump ups, and then lease option information in here also. So all of that data will begin to populate. Our August release will not happen at the exact same time as the rest of Intacct. We will be at the very end of August, but all of this will be released at that point in time. So you'll have access to all of it from there, and all of that data will then flow through, and you'll be able to see it, do reports, views, so on that information. All right, so I thought it was important that we mention that. In our last release, for those of you that did not notice, each grid now, whether it be a property, unit, tenant, or lease, obviously they all sort and all of those types of things. We've now added an export option on each one of these. So you can export them to CSV, Excel, Word, or PDF, at any point in time. We do not currently customize these views. We do have that in our development pipeline, but currently that feature is not yet available. We are working to make it so you'll be able to customize these views, but for right now, you will be able to drop this data out to Excel in a very quick and easy fashion. Okay, Stuart, that's kind of everything I had to cover. Do we have any questions from anybody?
The only other question that came in is that they said is they have construction. Does this also work with the construction module at the same time?
That's a great question. At this point, Sage Intacct Real Estate is not integrated with construction. If you have construction, you can still add Sage Intacct Real Estate, but we have not yet integrated it. We do have on our development pipeline for sometime next year that as work is being done on a construction job, you could tie it to a given property, unit, tenant, and lease, so that then we know when the tenant takes delivery of the space, if we're doing a tenant improvement or something like that. But then we also want to share like feature information. So if there's pieces of equipment that are going to be like, if I've got an apartment unit and we're, going to have a refrigerator, a range, so on and so forth, I want to store all of that asset information. Right now, we have simple check boxes. We're looking to expand that out pretty significantly.
Perfect. And I think that was it. I answered a few other minor ones behind the scenes, but I wanted to make sure that we hit all those. So Dom, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk about some of the tips and tricks regarding this here. Again, what we'll do is that if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to any of us here at ETHOSystems. Be happy to make sure that we answer those for you. Otherwise, feel free to sign up for our other coming webinars. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. But I'd like to thank everyone today for attending. Have a great one.
Thank you, Stuart.
Take care. Bye.